Hi, I'm Metta Spencer. Today, I think we need to talk about these diseases that go from people to animals, back from animals to people, and around and around and around. They're called zoonotic diseases. And there is a group of people who specialize in studying the relationship between diseases of human beings and diseases of animals. Some of them also study the relationship between both of these types of diseases and the environment. Anyway, I have always felt that this is a branch of medicine that shouldn't be just reserved for health practitioners, healthcare delivery people, and public health experts, but this is a place where ordinary citizens should have an opportunity to participate in as sort of a social movement. So that's my secret agenda. And I've been looking for ordinary people, that is to say, people who are not, wearing white jackets and with stethoscopes around their neck, but who are trying to influence public opinion and mobilize ordinary citizens to be engaged with public health issues. And I found a couple. I think, today we're going to have that kind of conversation. I believe, Louisiana, but I'm not quite sure where, is Amy LeBoeuf. Amy, what city are you in?
I'm in the Sulphur area, which is right next door to Lake Charles. So we're about 2 hours east of Houston.
All right, very good. Amy is the founder and director of Louisiana One Health in Action, and she's the chair of the U.S. One Health Education Task Force, which sounds pretty good to me. I mean, I actually don't know a thing about it, but we're going to find out. And she has another friend that she's brought along today. They've known each other a long time, and this is Amanda Elam. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, Amanda?
Elam, yes.
Elam, good. And Amanda is the CEO and co-founder of Galaxy Diagnostics. She's a research fellow at Babson College in Massachusetts, where she studies women's entrepreneurship and healthcare entrepreneurship. Yep. Tell me about yourself, Amy. Let's just begin to get acquainted, and then I'll go on and talk to Amanda.
I have been a K-12 public educator this is my 23rd year. I've been in Texas and Louisiana, but I've spent the last 20-ish years here in Louisiana. And I came about One Health to know the term One Health. I knew nothing of it. It didn't come from education, from the education field, unfortunately, because it's much needed there. But basically through our family's journey, which is how I met Amanda. And our son had this mysterious illness, and we saw over 40 doctors across 19 different specialties. And he basically went from playing tournament soccer, totally normal kiddo at 11, to a wheelchair to a hospital bed in a matter of months. He was in the hospital for a month or so in Houston, and it was a multi-systemic issues going on with him. The coming out of Houston, he was diagnosed with an autoimmune reaction to something infectious. And we didn't know what the infectious thing was at the time. And so I'm thinking just like, what in the world did he get into? And prior to that, I had also been thinking that, because he went from normal to, it was just nuts, And so basically the only thing, and I had asked a couple of doctors about it, was that the only preceding event I could really even remotely think of that was out of the ordinary is that these two little stray kittens showed up at our house, and he was just playing with them, not rough play or anything, but had a little string and was trying to play with some of the cats, the two kittens, and one just nicked his finger, just a very small nick, but it was enough to draw blood. And I mean, it was a complete non-event in our life, no tears, nothing bad or anything. We washed it, soap and water or whatever, and then just kind of put a Band-Aid on it and thought we were done with that. But it did turn out that through through the hospital visit and some of the treatment that he had there, because they basically told me the infectious thing is probably long gone. This is just the autoimmune reaction part that's happening. And so he developed this rash that was on both thighs, inner and outer, and then eventually on his back. And it was a stretch mark-like rash. And I got to Googling that because I was like, I've never seen anything like this before. And it really was it has been associated with Bartonella. And then I was like, what in the world is Bartonella? And so I figured out, holy cow, that is the pathogen that causes cat scratch disease. So then I was like, oh my word, I started reading all of this research by Dr. Ed Breitschwert and Dr. Maggi, and then Dr. Moziani. And I got to thinking, I wonder if you can see this person as a patient, because somebody, like, no one's really helping Jack to the level that he needed help. Because if you had endocrinology problems, you went to an endocrinologist. Or if you had joint pain, you went to a rheumatologist. No one was this comprehensive person trying to get to the root issue, So anyway, we ended up reaching out to Galaxy Diagnostics, and that's how I met Amanda and Dr. Breitschwert. And eventually Jack did see Dr. Moziani, who's a physician scientist, rheumatology area is his specialty, but he did treat Jack. And after several years under his care, he has made a full recovery. So he's starting a sophomore year of college and is ready to put this behind him. That's how Amanda and I met. And then that got me interested, as an educator also, what are our kids learning about One Health and about, vector-borne diseases is only one aspect of One Health. But how our human, animal, and environmental health is interconnected. And so I got to researching of the National Health Education Standards, and I found out there is zero mention of many things. They were created in 1995 and have not been updated since 2004. So they're very
what hasn't been updated?
The National Health Education Standards for K-12 students. That no matter what field that these kids grow up to be in, they need to make those considerations of how our decisions as humans impact animal and environmental health. And just, if they're in architecture, or if they're in, not just a health related field necessarily, but all of those, just the foundational concepts of One Health need to be considered no matter what occupation that these kiddos end up being in. So that kind of got us as a family. I do still do a lot with other Bartonella patients, but that got us interested in where are we going with Jack's journey and our journey as a family through this. And so that's how we ended up founding the Louisiana One Health in Action, because I really wanted to help educate our community.
Did he continue to have some kind of residual infection of Bartonella?
It was probably 18 months-ish before he ever had his first treatment for Bartonella itself. So it was, very much systemic at that point. And it's, once that happens, is hard to, I don't even know if it's possible to eradicate, but it certainly is possible to regain your health. It isn't only about treating the infection, it's also about host response. As the patient's own immune system, how it is behaving and reacting towards that pathogen.
He stayed pretty sick until he got the right kind of treatment. Is that it?
Absolutely. Yes. He was in a wheelchair, unable to stand for longer than about a minute.
Well, I just love the fact that you're doing education work about the whole One Health approach. So let me turn to Amanda now, because now you mentioned that you went to Galaxy Diagnostics, and that's how you met Amanda, but presumably Amanda had a tool or something to help you. So what is it you do at Galaxy Diagnostics, Amanda?
So Metta, we're advancing direct detection testing for Bartonella, which is the cat scratch disease bacteria, also Lyme disease, which is Borrelia, is that causative bacteria. There are a number of pathogens that are very low abundance, elusive, hard to diagnose. And so we're advancing direct detection, primarily using something called sample enrichment. So we're basically increasing the bacterial load, or we're using capture technologies to concentrate the bacteria in order to increase the sensitivity of detection and make more usable tests. The reason why this is necessary, a lot of people know about the Lyme disease controversy, but in tick-borne diseases and flea-borne diseases generally, these infections are often thought to be very rare, so they're a low priority in medicine. And the only tools that we have available really in infectious disease and emerging infectious disease for these infections are antibody testing. And you'll know from the whole COVID, the crash course in infectious disease diagnostics that everybody got in COVID, that antibody testing is not considered reliable for documenting active infection in people. And so antibody testing wasn't, basically the FDA said, no, you can't use antibody testing to confirm COVID. Now, COVID's a fast growing viral infection. So a lot of the DNA testing, PCR, they call it, and the antigen tests that were eventually created using conventional techniques have been very useful. But in our area of medicine, we're dealing with pathogens that are very elusive, very stealthy. The Bartonella, for example, will invade the bloodstream, but it's intracellular. So it hides in the cells that line the vascular system called endothelial cells, and it cycles in and out, infecting the red blood cells. Some people know about trench fever, which is another Bartonella disease. So it's Bartonella quintana. It causes a 5-day fever. Again, this idea that the bacteria are cycling in and out of the blood.
No, I need more. What? That's fascinating. Trench disease.
Trench fever was so World War I is where it really, I think, became globally known. So trench fever is a louse-borne infection. So rats and lice and the bacteria. Basically, the soldiers in the trenches became infected, and we still have it in modern society. It's just primarily affects the homeless, and it's called urban trench fever. It's very common in cities where we have, rats and lice or fleas, and we have these little ecological symptoms. But again, considered very rare. But we don't really know how rare it is, or we haven't, and so we started advancing the diagnostics for it. And there, one of the most remarkable things we've discovered with the Bartonella research, and this is my colleagues and co-founders at North Carolina State University, Dr. Ed Breichford and Dr. Ricardo Maggi, have demonstrated that these bacteria are so elusive, Metta, that people may not even have antibodies against them. We can document the bacteria in the blood of people who never launched an antibody response. Because they infect at such low levels. So are they rare?
Yeah. You're working with bacteria. Is there a completely different line of investigation that goes into detecting viruses as opposed to bacteria? Or do the same methods and technologies that you use for one apply to both?
At a very high level, they do apply. But when you bring it down to the specifics of the organism, virology is a separate field of study from bacteriology because the pathogens have very different characteristics. So in virology, for example, some viruses have DNA and some viruses have RNA, which means you're doing a different type of PCR on them. They're also, they're not bounded. They don't have a cell wall. They're cell-free, and they go in and they infect host cells, and then they activate. So viruses aren't considered alive, right?
Yeah, I've often wondered,
but not alive,
borderline
right?
between life and not life.
Right. But bacteria are single cell organisms. So they're fully functional single cells.
Okay.
And they can exist independent from the host. And they're all parasites, right? But they exist separately from the host, which means that, for example, live viruses don't last very long on surfaces, like we talked about fomite transmission with COVID, but bacteria can stay active for a long time on surfaces because they're independent life forms.
Nowadays they're talking about detecting monkeypox in wastewater. Well, I knew that they could detect COVID in wastewater. And now I think also recently there was a comment about polio. There's polio in the US now, and they found it in wastewater. Now, I'm amazed that they can take water, I guess, from sewers or someplace, and find something as tiny and elusive as a virus in there that can't be shared by more than a tiny percentage of the population. How in the world do they detect something that's so tiny?
It's difficult until you start using technologies like nanotechnologies that help you capture and concentrate. And one of the technologies we're using is used for wastewater detection by a number of universities, municipalities, and the Coast Guard here in the US to monitor wastewater. So the answer is it's quite difficult, but Metta, there are some viruses, because they multiply at high numbers, they can be present even in wastewater at quite high levels, where there are other organisms that the counts are so low, it can be very difficult. And I think one of the best ways of explaining this, like Dr. Breitschwert likes to talk about jellyfish in the ocean, right? So we know there are jellyfish in the ocean, but if you threw a bucket in the ocean, what are the odds that you'd pull up a jellyfish?
Yeah, right,
So
exactly. That's why I couldn't understand it.
Right. So this is the whole idea of the pathobiology of the organism really matters in coming up with diagnostic strategies, coming up with tests or ways to find the organism. And so antibody testing is host response against an infection. And that's considered sort of this very easy, very inexpensive way to document infection. And we have many more antibodies against an infection than we would the actual organism. But antibodies can stay with us for a very long time once we develop them. And so direct detection is better for documenting acute infection, especially after antibiotic therapy, which usually causes a seroconversion. As the organisms are pushed into the blood, the body recognizes them and launches the antibodies. But if someone has persistent disease and you're only looking for antibodies, how do you know if those antibodies represent a persistent infection or just represent past exposure? That's why COVID experts said you can't use antibody testing because we just didn't know how long the infections would last or if they would persist in people. So we have that same problem for these bacterial infections.
Wait a minute. They say you can't use antibody detection, but they use antibody detection all the time.
Yeah,
I mean, they tell you whether you've had COVID or not, according to whether or not you've got the antibodies, right?
Yeah, because it can tell you about past exposure. So it's a great surveillance tool. It's inexpensive, it's cheap. And it can tell you what disease prevalence is in a population, how many people have been exposed, but it's more difficult to confirm active infection with antibody testing unless you have something called IgM antibodies. Again, for these elusive infections, you may not have an antibody response. And for chronic infections, it's very confusing to use antibody testing as confirmatory and becomes sort of politically controversial. Especially in new disease areas.
What's politically controversial about chronic infections?
Well, it's not well understood in medicine that infections can cause chronic disease. In fact, and this might be interesting for some of you science buffs out there, but in the 1800s, that's when we discovered that bacteria and viruses can cause disease, right? Before that, we thought it was the humors or evil possession or something, but scientists confirmed, and it was super controversial, but it was called the plague theory of disease, and it was about acute disease. And so we set up some standards, Koch's postulates, to show scientific proof of when an organism caused a disease. in people. Now we're on the second generation, and it's called the new plague theory of disease. And that is about the role that pathogens play in chronic disease, and it's all tangled up in our microbiomes, what a healthy microbiome is. When we do research on microbiomes, guess what we find? Healthy people carry pathogens. But those pathogens, those infections, may not be causing disease just yet. And when we study sick people, we find that they have a lot more pathogens. And so there's this whole concept of the role of infection in chronic disease, and this emerging concept of the pathobiome. How many of us are walking around with pathogens that under the right conditions can cause disease? So this is new science, the new plague theory of disease.
Just in the middle of the night, I was reading a scientific paper, which I couldn't understand much of at all, but it was about probiotics in the mouth. Because I've got some, my teeth are going bad, and I wanted to find out, they have something about if you take certain kind of additional bacteria, you get the flora in the mouth is better balanced and stuff. So they were listing a whole bunch of different kinds of bacteria. It seemed that it wasn't a matter of getting rid of the bad bacteria, but of adding some good ones, because apparently they feed on each other. Some of them excrete stuff that's the food for the others.
Well, and we can think of it as like a parallel with human society, right? Under what condition? There's always corruption and crime in society, but under what conditions does it destroy a society versus we can manage it? So we all have a tolerance, and this is the host immune response idea. We all have a tolerance for insults to the body, whether they're toxins, allergens, or actually infections. And healthy people who don't lead stressful lives, and are active and eat well, and we can manage a lot. But we have an aging population. We have an increasingly obese and sedentary population. And we have really bad food choices available that a lot of people take advantage of. They're delicious, but not so great for us. And so that whole concept of, the host response, and are we in good shape to manage a high tolerance for these types of organisms?
Okay. Now, here's my question, new one. It just occurred to me is, you're describing this thing about the microbiome, but it never occurred to me that is a zoonotic condition. But do you count that as we should define the word zoonotic, it's, please
from
do
animals
so.
To people. Yeah. And zoonotic disease are diseases transmitted from animals to people. A lot of people don't realize that we can also transmit them back to the animals in our lives that we love and care for, maybe work with. So zoonotic means from animals to people. Vector-borne means all the blood-sucking arthropods or insects that are involved. So everyone knows about mosquito-borne disease. A lot of people know about tick-borne disease, but there are lots of other vectors. Fleas transmit disease, lice transmit disease, kissing bugs transmit disease, Chagas disease, and vectors play a really important role in zoonotic diseases. They're often the way that diseases get transmitted from an animal to a person and back again.
Okay, well, would you call the whole study of the microbiome a branch of One Health research or not? Because it I hadn't thought of it as such.
I absolutely would. I mean, this is one of I think the key principles in microbiome research is that we are not as separate from our environment as we thought we were. We literally, the microbiome studies, for example, that go into the household and study what types of organisms we have, microscopic organisms we have in our house, and then look at what we're actually carrying in our mouths, for example, or on our skin, find that there's a high correlation between and we're very dependent on microorganisms actually to make our bodies work. And so we don't have this strong barrier between us and our environment that we used to think we had.
Okay, what about, for example, black mold in your bathroom or something? Do you consider that part of One Health? Because mold is not exactly another animal.
No, but it's part of our environment. And
uh,
we are, and and again, there's some types of mold that might be irritating to our sinuses and we can live with pretty well, but black mold is highly toxic. And so that's why and we can tolerate a certain amount of it before we get really, really, really ill. But we're very concerned about the way we build houses, the way we maintain houses, and how often we update them. And by the way, those workers who are doing the updates, are they protecting themselves and their lungs from anything from the dust? Bartonella, for example, the FDA research team has documented Bartonella and dust mites bacteria there.
Did you say dust mites?
Dust mites are, they're arthropods. Yep.
Uh-huh. And they live at all kinds of places, don't they? Dust mites. If people have them in their beds, in their bedding and things, right?
They're everywhere in your house because they dust mites feed on, for example, the skin that we shed, right? And so wherever we leave a trail, those dust mites are going to be there. Our food system is a huge source of zoonotic disease, because the animals that go through the factories that are raised on farms, those people who work with them and work in slaughterhouses are at high risk for zoonotic diseases like brucellosis and slaughterhouses. But all the salmonellas from chicken and even on the plants we grow in agriculture, our wonderful vegetables, there are a lot of agricultural organisms that thrive in agricultural system. We need to wash our lettuce before. And so we aren't that far away from our environment. And I think that's one of, broader scientific understanding that's kind of supporting this research that's looking at the role of infection and chronic disease. But Metta, I will say for you and for the audience that most of you have already heard about the role of organisms in chronic disease, because it's the role of infection in causing cancer that's really leading and really receiving the most funding. Again, because cancer has a high mortality rate and a really high morbidity rate. It's very, very, very serious, right? And so that's where infection studies are really driving it. But we're also looking at the role of infection in Alzheimer's disease. How do these infections we can live with for a long time change our physiology in ways that make us susceptible to different types of diseases? And that's why, like Amy's story and Jack's story, I mean, it's profound that something every day in our environment could end up causing something so serious, but be completely missed by most of the doctors, involved. And 40 doctors is a lot, and that is expensive, and it takes a long time. And we are not very good. And this is my area of research, right? Innovation and entrepreneurship, where our system is so bureaucratic and so resistant to change. The medical establishment, it's really hard to get new discoveries out there and into practice, especially if they're rare and there isn't a lot of funding. And if the establishment's worried about things like, antibiotic resistance, they don't want bad news. They don't want another reason for doctors to prescribe antibiotics. And that's where our research is contributing to new understandings around, what we need to take seriously, how we need to take it seriously, and also how people can protect themselves.
And you just used the word Alzheimer's. Well, Alzheimer's is a chronic disease for sure. But are you saying that you think, or that some people are speculating that Alzheimer's might be caused by an infection?
Oh, we're so far beyond speculation. There's lots of published research. There's an emerging scientific consensus, and I've actually seen a video. But the amyloid betas, right? This is the plaques that form in the brain. That protein, the amyloid beta, is literally triggered by the presence of an organism. And we have had this conventional view that, for example, infections can't cross the blood-brain barrier. But we also have recent discoveries showing that the blood-brain barrier is not nearly as much of a barrier as we used to think it was. In fact, it's an extension of the lymphatic vasculature. So it's literally a vascular system that surrounds our brain. And research and rodent models have actually demonstrated that under conditions of extreme stress, that lymphatic vascular system, the blood-brain barrier, becomes highly permeable. And literally, the lymphatic system pours into the brain, and anything in that lymphatic system pours into the brain. And so the idea that we may, have organisms that we're tolerating or contribute to dementia in our brain has become accepted.
Oh my, but you just then threw in a whole different dimension. The stress idea. Yep. Are you saying that, if you've got a big problem, you lie awake at night worrying about something, you're yep. more like, or the roof is falling in on you and you're in an accident or something, that improves or exacerbates your probability of being affected by this lymphatic issue?
Oh, absolutely. So think of it as anxiety, depression, insomnia, and your immune system gets suppressed, and things like the blood-brain barrier get more permeable, and then you're more susceptible to infection, and it's a downward spiral.
Oh boy, I don't know whether to be happy to hear what you're saying or despair.
But I'm going to say my grandmother was right, though. Get a good night, stop worrying, get a good night's sleep, eat well, get out of the house, exercise, go play with your friends. I mean, these are all the things she taught me, right? And the older I get, the more I get it. She was totally right.
Well, yes, but it's such a fascinating body of research. So many issues and so many variables you're throwing into the pot, mm-hmm. that the idea of how you disentangle what causes what and the impact of these variables. Oh my goodness, what a research agenda.
I have to tell you, and an agenda for social movement like One Health, right, Amy? Absolutely. I mean, this is huge, really understanding that we're very connected to our environment. We need to understand those connections, that we actually are living more closely to animals in many ways than we have through most of history, because our animals are in bed with us, right? We love our pets, our dogs or cats will sleep in bed with us. So, and that's another thing. My grandmother was like, dogs and cats outside. And so we need more than just research. We actually need people, we need kids learning about it. We need people being aware of what is around them and what could pose a threat and what to do to reduce the risk of that. And oh, by the way, if you are exposed, take that to your doctor, talk to your doctor about those risks. And doctors need to know to ask the right questions, right? Have you had a flea infestation recently? Right? Were you playing with cats? Did you, do you live or work with animals? Are you out there hiking, hunting, spending a lot of time in nature? Do you camp? I mean, most doctors don't ask that. Never mind, do they even ask you what you do for a living? Are you a veterinary technician? Are you a breeder? Are you a farmer? Or do you work in a meat processing factory? I mean, those are salient. Are you a city tree worker? I mean, these are salient. This is salient data for doctors to know. But we aren't even training our doctors on this One Health perspective.
Well, and Amanda, like Metta, one of the things I remember telling Amanda, like way back when I was talking about, like, I have to help. I never want anybody to go through what our family's been through and feel so frustrated and desperate and just. I mean, it was complete life upheaval, and I don't want anybody to ever have to go through that and advocate so hard, for answers and help. So I remember telling Amanda, like, just the patient intake form, just that, if it could be designed from a One Health perspective, right. Mm-hmm. That alone would like, a lot of these vector-borne diseases have hallmark symptoms, okay? But like the bullseye rash for Lyme disease, but not everybody gets a bullseye. In fact, not like less than 50% even get a bullseye rash.
Well,
So
what is a bullseye rash?
Erythema migrans. It looks like this, but usually with an empty center. So they call it a bullseye. But it can be small. It can be just, 3 centimeters, or it could be much larger.
You have multiple even, yeah.
And what is it a symptom of?
Lyme disease.
Yeah.
Oh, some of the things that I'm interested in are the fact that with climate change, the habitat of certain animals is moving moving north, I guess, mostly to the ones that are in the tropics are trying to get
warmer,
cooler places. Mm-hmm. And so they may be bringing diseases that didn't exist in our region before. Is somebody focusing on that kind of?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of vector surveillance programs. There are a lot of, disease surveillance programs that focus on the animal reservoirs, the animals that carry the disease, as well as human disease surveillance. It's a really cool website called the Companion Animal Parasite Council. It's really neat interactive mapping tool that shows where dogs are testing positive for antibodies against Lyme disease and other tick-borne diseases, also heartworm. And there are a bunch of scientists who've actually published several papers now in Duke and University of Georgia, for example, who published papers saying, maybe we could use this prevalence data in dogs to clarify where people are at risk for disease. And this is so important. Amy mentioned the intake forms. The other thing doctors don't ask you is they don't ask you if you've traveled recently. So in the United States, when it comes to educating doctors and public health community on tick-borne disease, Metta, they focus on the Northeast, where they talk about states being endemic to the disease. They just have a high rate of disease there. But people, we travel all over the place, and dogs are testing positive in states where, the levels are thought to be low. And so I think there's a whole new approach to educating around vector-borne and zoonotic diseases that our public health institutions really need to take up, so that we can ensure that patients are receiving good care when they show up at their doctor's office.
Well, I'm going to have to ask my friend Ronald St. John about his project called Citata. He was the Canadian Public Health Authority when SARS hit Canada. So he was in charge of combating SARS, and he's on our board of directors now. And he's a good friend, and he always, I could have asked him to participate in today's show, probably should have, but he has a company now that he's been retired from the government, public health, called Citata, where when people are going traveling, he can let them know what diseases are happening in the place where they're going and that sort of thing. Now, maybe he should include on his intake form, are you taking your dog with you?
Absolutely positive. We have a video on our Bartonella site. The public television ITV group actually did a special segment on Bartonella. And one of the stories there is about a woman who went to the beach in Israel, had a high exposure to sand fleas there, and came back and ultimately developed a disease related to Bartonella infection that they believe she picked up in Israel.
From sand fleas?
From sand fleas, sandflies. Sandflies in South America, these sand fleas in Israel. And so, again, but this isn't mainstream medicine. Like, doctors don't learn about this stuff in medical school. And I think we all know doctors can't possibly learn everything about medicine in medical school. They have to kind of focus on priorities. But, again, are these really rare infections? Because you only find what you look for. Nobody's looking for these things in patients right now.
And then in light of, the bringing this up again about the patient intake form, if it was done from a One Health perspective, from a One Health approach, a lot of these vector-borne diseases or viral diseases or anything have flu-like symptoms. Well, I mean, how do you know when it's just the flu versus something that is, something more, maybe more rare, I guess. But I mean, I just feel like it would put different things on their radar, different diagnoses on their radar, if they could narrow it down a little bit to like, where have you traveled? What pets do you have? That kind of stuff, that kind of thing. But
combining risk factors with the symptoms, lab testing can help to some degree, right?
Yeah.
The long list of causes can cause a very short list of symptoms. And then that's part of the diagnostic process for physicians, is they have to figure out how to limit that. In the world of zoonotic, vector-borne disease, emerging, infectious disease more generally, we would just argue that, you should be considering the risk factors along with the symptoms in your initial workups.
Well, war clearly is a risk factor, because I think there is historically a correlation between pandemics and warfare. Soldiers, large numbers of them bring diseases along with them, or pick up things that maybe they wouldn't have picked up elsewhere, and so on. And I'm thinking back to what occurs to me now is Florence Nightingale. She went off to the Crimea or someplace in that region, and in the Crimean War, and set up hospitals. And I think maybe that's where she came down with something, but she was sick in bed the rest of her life. And she was very prestigious in her day. And so members of parliament would try to make an appointment to come to her bedside and consult her. She was very, very busy and worked very hard and accomplished a lot after she got sick. But nobody quite knows what was wrong with her, I gather. But I heard somebody use the word brucellosis. Now, I think brucellosis is a zoonotic disease, isn't it?
It is.
Tell me about it.
It's closely related to Bartonella. They're cousins.
Really?
I know, very closely. It's transmitted zoonotic because it's transmitted in blood. So this is where people who work in slaughterhouses or meat processing factories are at high risk, and hunters, by the way, are at high risk for brucellosis, because it's often comes from the animal to the person through blood exposure, contact with the blood. But then for the person to get it, it's like, do you have a nick in it has to get access to your bloodstream too. Right. So do you have a nick do you have a cut on your hand, or, did you put it in your eyes or in your nose or mouth, where you might have a lesion that gives it access to the bloodstream?
Is it connected to cows?
It is connected to cows. Yep. And brucellosis. Yeah. Also.
Can you get it from milk?
Transmission. I believe the answer is yes. It's not as common as blood transmission though.
But more common for, I say,
the soldiers who developed trench fever, many of them struggled for the rest of their lives. And I think the mental illness part of that was a post-war trauma, which is what most people assumed for a long time. But now people are actually saying, they had a Bartonella infection, especially, if it got into their central nervous system, a lot of the disease may have been more than just, fever of unknown origin or relapsing fatigue. It may have actually been a central nervous system infection. And so there are a number of infections, and you're absolutely right that war is a high risk time. And it isn't just that people are often more exposed to the environment or more exposed to blood through, the injury, but also you'll know that STDs spike during wartime as well.
Because this is something I didn't know until about 3 days ago. I watched a video by somebody named Cripps in Australia, who writes about disasters, global, threats, and he accounts among his global threats sliding intelligence. Now, I think I haven't been worried about. I didn't even know there was a decline in intelligence, but I'm pretty sure there's some kind of epidemic of mental disorders of various kinds, because I don't remember, I'm almost 91, and I don't remember in the little town where I grew up, there wasn't anybody who was incapacitated by anything you'd call mental illness. I mean, we were all normal, and but now every family I know has some member of the family that has to be looked after or something because they've got some disorder. Well, let's talk about that as a neurological, possibly a neurological epidemic of some kind. But I didn't know that there was also a problem with intelligence, but the Cripps points out, and I've checked it out since about 1975, intelligence in many countries, and not every country has evidence one way or another, but in a number of European countries, intelligence has been declining in the general population by 3 points per decade. So that there's been a 15-point decline in the overall intelligence level of some of these European countries. I don't think it's true of the US. I don't know whether it's been tested in Canada, but in any case, 15 points of IQ is a whopper of a difference. This has to be caused by something environmental or could be social, something in the world. It's not genetic. They're pretty sure it's not genetic because they see within the same family, parents raising children who are on the whole dumber.
Yeah. So, Metta, I can tell you like controversial subjects because you're touching on another one. I'm a sociologist by training. I am my doctorate in sociology. You are too. Then you'll appreciate.
Yeah, I was a sociology professor.
The bell curve and so of course, one of the biggest questions we would have if we looked at those studies is measurement. How are they measuring IQ? Because certainly in psychology, we moved away from this idea of singular intelligence and understand that the multiple intelligence is more descriptive of people in general. We also understand that the instruments used to measure IQ can be quite biased depending on your cultural background. So I would look very closely and skeptically at those studies. However, I will say that a hallmark of what we see in the world, a vector-borne disease with some of these, slow-growing, stealthy infections is the concept of brain fog. And so to what extent does, even mild levels of brain inflammation contribute to that? We also have research on trauma, though, and this gets into what's, was it the trauma itself or the susceptibility and something else is introduced? But people who go through trauma are more susceptible to living with low-level brain inflammation and experiencing brain fog and other measurable forms of cognitive impairment as a result. So brain injury is a concern. And then I would go look at the overall health of the population, right? We're sedentary, we eat bad food, we don't get enough sleep, and we're really stressed all the time.
Well, I think it's interesting that you put then look at the overall health of the population in the last place, below your concern about the measurement issues. Have there been people who've cast doubt on the measurement? In
IQ research, there's a tremendous amount of controversy around the tools used to measure IQ. So that's why I put that first, because I would say, hold on, what are we measuring? And then the other thing I will tell you that we are definitely seeing is there's this concept when we are studying standardization, standards, categorizing, this is how we organize our world, of sort of this regulatory creep. And so, for example, you can take topics like ADHD and even Asperger's might be, or autism might be more relevant, that autism is used to really describe individuals who had very extreme levels of dysfunction. But now in school systems, Amy, you can speak to this, but we have high functioning ADHD students and high functioning Asperger spectrum individuals. So we'd also, from a social perspective, want to consider, again, back to measurement, what are our definitions and who are we including or excluding from different categories of disease. So I think about that a lot around anxiety and depression, Metta, because I think that I had it. You're a little older than me, but when I was growing up, kids were anxious. It was just like this natural part of adolescence, for example, that we all of course you had dark times. Of course you felt ostracized and alienated and alone. And a lot of kids would do extreme things, to belong. But now we actually, those kids are actually ending up in therapy and are often ending up on medication. and they aren't being sort of forced to figure it out on their own. All of a sudden we put a light on mental illness, and we've said, listen, all those people are at risk and we need to take this seriously. So it's been problematized, and we pay more attention to it. And families are taking care of those people instead of leaving them alone.
Every family I know has somebody who's incapacitated, somebody that actually can't function.
And I have to tell you, my family, we have alcoholics, in older generations, but we call them alcoholics. We didn't call them depressed. We didn't call them, say they were suffering from anxiety. We said they had a substance abuse problem. Or why do you think they had substance abuse problems? It's like root cause medicine again. This idea these days, we're unpacking it and trying to understand what's at the root.
Okay, well, clearly we've gone beyond the whole notion of One Health, and yet, we've expanded that category, in my mind, a whole bunch. Anyway, actually, we blurred the edges of the category, because now I don't know what's inside and what isn't. In any case, I want to ask Amy a little more about your work in trying to make people more conscious of and possibly more engaged with the management of diseases involving transmission between animals and people. I think it's a glorious project you're heading. What is the organization that you've created, and what does it do?
Don't have a whole lot of time to invest, but in our nonprofit, which is the Louisiana One Health in Action. And, but I try to, number one, stay in my lane. As an educator, I don't try to speak on zoonotic disease. I am not a zoonotic disease expert by any means, but what I do know is that our kids and our general population, need education about One Health topics, and the One Health approach in general. But, and we've talked a lot about, today, about zoonotic diseases and that type of thing, vector-borne diseases, which are both One Health topics. There are, like what you've been saying, Metta, is that there are lots of different One Health topics. The realm is huge, but, other things that are, I don't want people to walk away from our talk and discussion today with like animals are bad or we should be careful and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, we should be cognizant that transmission can happen. But as pet owner, I have 2 dogs. They sleep in my bed, but both of those dogs are on flea and tick prevention, and they are on heartworm prevention. They are seen at the vet regularly. So, making sure your animals are as healthy as they can be so that you are also protecting yourself, not just them, and then keeping your environment, your house clean, making sure, dogs just do things on the carpet sometimes, or, on the floor. Are you keeping your house clean? After you feed them, do you wash your hands for the food that could be, have salmonella or whatever? So there's also lots of different One Health practices, being mindful of those things. And those are the types of things that I really want to, very practical things. The goal of those K-12 national health education standards are to produce health literate adults. And you've got people, like Amanda was saying earlier about how COVID was such a crash course in, science in general, but testing, zoonotic diseases. People have probably before that, unless you were catapulted into your own pandemic or, your own health journey, like our family was with Jack's Bartonellosis diagnosis, they aren't familiar with those terms on the daily, like we have been for the last 2 years, So I think that it's more about mindfulness and, seeing how our decisions impact our own health, the health of animals, our environment, and how the interconnection is. One of the main events that we do every year is called Walk and Wag. for One Health. And so basically what that is an opportunity to kind of celebrate the human-animal bond, because animals do us a lot of good. I love coming home from a stressful day and loving on my dogs. It just brings my stress factor down so much. I still belong to a church that I don't go to very much, but every year they bring their pets in and we'd have a blessing of the
blessing of the animals. Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just a day, because we try to do it right around the International One Health Day, which is November 3rd every year.
Okay.
Just to kind of bring that to the surface and get people familiar with the term One Health, but also that, hey, we are, our health is interconnected with animals in our shared environment and that kind of thing. So we do a 3K fun run that people can bring their dogs to. You don't have to run. So anyway, we had that. And then afterwards, we have a One Health fair that has little kind of stations that people, whether people in public health, I've had some presenters from our local high school that are in the ag classes that will come and talk about or do a little presentation about vector-borne disease in general or how to prevent it. Some of the local veterinarians will do some things, some booths, like how to do tick checks on your dog, because we're in the sportsman's paradise down here in Louisiana. That's what they call us in Southwest Louisiana. And so how to do tick checks on your dog and on yourself, because we have lots of hunting, of course, and that kind of thing. So we do that. We have master naturalists that come and just talk about the benefits of being in nature, and that the impacts it can have on your emotional health, mental health. That's perfect.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much for having us. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Metta.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week and sometimes more. This is episode number 488. You can watch or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. And we even post transcripts eventually there. When you get to that website, look around. There are conversations there about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. And after you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your thoughts about the show. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can buy a single copy or subscribe for $20 Canadian per year through PressReader. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see the cover of the current issue and buttons to click to subscribe.